my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today, we are going to take a spoiler-free look at Kaiju number 8, chapter 83. This chapter was almost 30 pages long, and so much happens in it. The first thing I would just want to start off with is that there is a distinct difference between the cover art for this chapter and what actually happens in the chapter. And I find that extremely intriguing. I can't help wondering if it's foreshadowing. If you want to go and look at the chapter, you'll see what I mean. But see if you can tell what is the difference between the cover art and what happens in the chapter. And I'm not just talking the level of detail. In the chapter, focus on eyeballs. Focus on eyes and eyeballs. All right. But yes, so there's a distinct difference between the cover art and the chapter, and that difference has played into elements of who exactly is in control of the Kaiju number 8 body in past chapters. I've done a bunch of different videos on that. But before we get into all that, you can go check out the links below the video to get yourself a copy of my book, Humans Are Weird, Let's Work It Out, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. All right, so 29 pages. And there's only, of those, only 3 are page-and-a-half spreads, and there's no 2-page spreads. So like I said, there is a lot happening in this chapter. So as we have led up to this chapter, there have been certain storylines, certain story threads, character development, what do you call it when characters are mutually, relationship developments that have been going on, that I wouldn't say they completely come to fruition, but this chapter shows how these characters have developed. So what am I talking about? In several previous chapters, you've had Kafka stressing about whether he's being valued for himself as a human or whether he's just being valued as Kaiju number 8. You had him out on the training track running around and around before Vice Captain Hoshina showed up. Now, in this chapter, this is addressed, but not from Kafka's perspective. So this chapter gives us an audience perspective on how the Defense Force thinks about this situation. We also get to see the development that these various characters have gone through. So that thread is Kafka a kaiju who thinks he's a human? Or is he a human who has more intimate access to kaiju weaponry than the rest of the Defense Force? Now, it's nowhere near answered. That is still a developing question. But at the very least, the perspective on that is addressed in this chapter. Then you have one of the story threads that we've been following up. What's going to happen to Kokoru? How is her combat with the brainy ballerina going to wrap up? What is Kaiju number 9's plan overall? And what's going on with what is the intelligence level of these various Daikaiju who have been sent out? And we get some real plot twists in there. Call them corkscrew plot twists. Again, this is a classic Shonen Jump manga. We all know exactly where the plot is coming from and where it's heading. There is one fairly large twist in here. I was expecting the combat scenes to go down a particular way, and they just don't. But the main theme of this chapter, I think, is actually fairly subtle. Shockingly, I'm going back to tie it back to a C.S. Lewis quote. I just purchased that book that the Wade Center put out, the combination of C.S. Lewis's writing advice, and one of his most important pieces of writing advice, and this was more of a piece of life advice that just applies really well to writing, is that in order to be original, you have to stop thinking about being original. In order to be of value to your community, you have to stop being of value to your community. In order to be socially acceptable, you have to stop thinking about whether or not you're socially acceptable. And up to this point, Kafka has just been stressing and stressing and stressing out about whether or not his fellow Defense Force officers see him as a kaiju or a human, whether he's valuable only as kaiju number 8 or as a human. And in this chapter, I don't think it's much of a spoiler. This might be considered a slight spoiler, but in this chapter, Kafka has clearly put all of that aside. He's not thinking about himself. He's only focusing on the task in front of him, on the service in front of him, doing what has to be done. And in this moment, he's not stressing about what his value is to the Defense Force or how the Defense Force views him. But in this moment, Matsumoto gives we, the audience, a really, really good view of how the Defense Force view them. And it's just an excellent illustration of that concept. In order to be original, you have to stop worrying about being original and just tell a good story. If you want to be accepted in any peer group, you have to start focusing on the goals of the peer group and stop focusing on being accepted by the peer group. In order to find yourself, so you have to lose yourself. Now, this is a very deep philosophical and moral point, but it's not the slightest bit preachy. This is really just a rock'em sock'em kaiju battle, but the theme is just layered in there. And I really appreciated both the message and the subtlety and the kaiju punching each other. But what do you think, my wonderful viewers? Is that what you got out of this chapter? The subtlety of the importance of the message that in order to truly be yourself, you have to stop thinking about yourself? Or were you just in it for the kaiju punching? Hit that like and subscribe button. Tell me what you think stuck out to you the most about this chapter. And peace out, my wonderful viewers.